So, just a couple of things right off the bat before I launch into how my story intersects with my work and how you can be involved. Um, I just want to like lay a foundation for a few of the things that I talk about. Um, First and foremost, my primary focus is emotional and spiritual abuse. That is not in any way to diminish physical abuse, but we have found, uh, talking to victims, being in support groups, and through just different research studies, that the emotional effects and the altered mental framework that occurs when there is abuse, it seems less uh, determined by the type of abuse and more by the methods of control. And that is what abuse is all about, is an attempt to control you in whatever way will work the best. So for some people, psychological abuse is what how they are most easily controlled. And so that's what the abuser uses. For some people, it's physical. And for some people, it's spiritual. Now, what do I mean by the differences between physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual? Um, when I say emotional, I use that as a blanket term to include anything that is not physical. So oftentimes emotional abuse and spiritual abuse are tied together in how I use it. Um, I I will use emotional abuse most often, um, just because that covers kind of all of it for me. What does that cover? Any kind of control. And when I'm speaking about um, emotional abuse, I mean, I am intentionally separating it from physical abuse. But again, as I mentioned before, those two have very similar effects on a person. So even though that I'm focusing on emotional abuse this evening, if you're experiencing physical abuse or you have a community member that you're pretty sure is experiencing physical abuse, this still all applies. And name calling can fall under that. Yelling, uh, tone of voice is a method of control, and the louder you get, it can be um, an effort to exert control through fear, if that is how the dynamic works out. I'm not saying that is always the case, but oftentimes, volume can be and yelling can be a control tactic. Gaslighting, which is basically trying in some way to make you feel like you are crazy or wrong, even when you know or have an inkling that you might be accurate. Isolation from friends, from relatives, from your children, from pets, from being able to go to work, threats, uh, any kind of threats can be a control tactic. Punishment, any kind of, well, you did this, well, then I'm not going to do that. Neglect, um, and financial abuse would all fall under emotional abuse in how I use. Okay, so I'm gonna just jump into my story now, um, as it relates to you. Hopefully, not what you're experiencing, but if you're experiencing, hopefully you can take some comfort. And then I'm going to go through three kind of main points: the hidden, the ignored, and the excused. And yeah, hopefully you will be really able to grasp that by the end if I can communicate effectively. Okay. Um, so I presented to the world a very happy, beautiful, growing marriage that to a pastor of a church, and we were doing all the right things. He was in ministry, he was serving, he was working, we had kids, and even in my own mind, I did not understand what my life was like. Even in my own mind, I hid from me what I was experiencing. So that's something really key to keep in mind as you are living through abuse yourself and living next to community members that um, are experiencing abuse, and something to be sort of alert for of hmm, interesting. What are they not talking about? What am I not acknowledging? And for me, it was my life was supposed to be wonderful. It looked that way and it was supposed to look that way. And so things that didn't fit into wonderful were explained away. Explained away by me, explained away by my ex, or framed in a way that indicated we're working on it and we're growing and we're sorry and it won't happen again. Um, the the hidden part of abuse is because it's so uh, shameful. I'm ashamed that I'm not, for me personally, it was I'm ashamed that I can't be a better person so that he's happier. Um, and so every time that I picked him off, I would go into this pattern of trying to figure out what I did wrong, how to fix it, and how not to repeat that, which is really, really what a strong relationship, there's elements of that that are needed in a strong relationship where each partner is willing to the take ownership for their actions and correct what they can or alter what they can, even if it doesn't wasn't actually bad, but the other person just had trouble dealing with it, and then you can come together. But the problem with abuse is you have one partner trying to fix what's wrong. And that's my story. I was trying to fix what's wrong and closing in on myself, where the perpetrator then just keeps heaping and explaining away um their own weaknesses. Well, I can't because of this. Well, I can't because of that. Well, I'm just tired, so you can't expect so much of me. Well, I'm tired. I worked all day, so you can't ask me to do the dishes. Uh, and just a constant putting off of responsibility with an excuse. Um, when and because of the internalized guilt that I had, which was actually something I would separate from guilt. Um, I think there's a time where you're actually guilty of something that you can correct. And so guilty is still a strong word. Um, Something that, it wasn't that beneficial that you did. And let's correct it and move in a different direction. Um, where there's abuse, those little minor things that you can do, maybe not as beneficially as you could have, are blown way out of proportion and blamed on you, and you become a source of contempt. And I began to feel ugly, unnecessary, unhelpful, un unneeded, because everything that I tried to do was not it was an attempt to build a relationship where there wasn't an equal partnership. Um, so that I hopefully have communicated a little bit of how easy it is to hide. Um, because I feel so ashamed that I'm not good enough. I can't speak. And um, my ex couldn't speak out because he wouldn't acknowledge or wouldn't address what he needed to fix and was explaining it away. And so it became more and more hidden within our family. Um, so then what happens with many victims and with me especially is you reach a breaking point where something shows. There's a little thing or a big thing that shows just for a minute and somebody notices. And then we get into the so prevalent reaction of the community and families that are around victims is ignoring what they see. Because up until this point, the marriage looked really squeaky clean, really beautiful, really model. Um, and then so you have this one little thing peek out that just sort of escapes all the hiding. And people looking in are like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And if you don't know, to just ask a few questions or to indicate to the victim that you are there, or the victim themselves doesn't understand what's going on because they're hiding, then it's very easy to ignore. And given, I would say our society, I don't know really the specifics of your area. This is something I feel like I'm seeing, really not localized, but nationally. But I really don't have any research or anything for that. So that's just from talking to people and seeing what they think. So that's not good research. So I can't tell you for sure. But um, the the feeling I'm getting is this is pretty prevalent, um, many places. And that's when you see something, you're not quite sure. There's a tendency that unless there's a leadership figure saying, oh, that's a problem, there's a tendency to diminish and ignore. Um, and of course, you don't want to blow something out of proportion if they're just having a fight. Of course, you don't want to get CPS involved if it was just an argument they had. So the hesitancy is so um, real and warranted in light of those big like scary things. What if I call the police? What's that going to do for this family? Um, there's so many things to think about that could be possible dangers for the family involved. And I'm not necessarily advocating for involving any of the public services, and yet I am. So what I'm really trying to help you see is that ignoring it is going to help the abuser and harm the victim. If it's when there's abuse, ignoring it helps the abuser. It gives them more power. It isolates the victim more, and that's what happened to me. And I've talked to other victims and been in support groups that everybody says the same thing, like, why didn't somebody say something? Why didn't they talk to me about it? Why didn't they ask me a few questions? Why didn't they at least offer to hear me? At least say, hey, it looked like you were really upset. You want to talk about it? Uh, I had a situation where I kind of reached my boiling point and I used loud words, really big arm gestures to try to indicate what was going on in front of other people. And I was speaking to my ex. Uh, and it was in the company of many people who had what I would have considered at the time a very close relationship with me. Nobody said anything. Nobody asked me, "What's going on? Are you okay? How come where was the anger? What was the anger over? Do you feel safe?" Uh, Now, my answers to those questions at that time would not have been very helpful to them. So, if you get very unhelpful answers like, "Yeah, I'm fine, I'm just angry. Yeah, I feel safe. I just don't know what to do right here. Yeah, I just feel like I can't get through to him." Just the as a victim, if you have a safe person who you can open up just a little tiny bit, that would be really helpful to them to be able to help you just a little tiny bit. You don't have to tell them your whole story. You don't have to tell them all of the details, but opening up just a little bit helps them take what you're experiencing and be able to join you in that. And the more they can join you in that, not actually come into your family, but just emotionally be with you in that, the more that we can build a community of help. And as a community member, the more you can build your safety for that person, uh, not reacting to what they say, even though it might be really horrible to you. Not jumping to, okay, we got to fix this and this and this, and you need to do this and this, but just literally saying, oh gosh, that's so hard. I don't know how you're getting through it, but it's amazing. It opens yourself up to being a safe person for that victim, and it opens up space for that victim to be like, okay, maybe when something happens, they'll think of you and they'll be able to come to you. It takes a long time for someone to come to a place where they are ready to accept help or ready to create boundaries and safety and move out or whatever their safety plan they need to be. And it takes lots, sometimes years of steady, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe for you by just being there for their pain. Um, so then moving on when it's really obvious and um people see what's going on. They've been told what's going on. The pretty picture is still in front of their face. And I still had my pretty picture in front of my face. And I remember walking into mediation. I had filed for divorce and we were walking in to sign paperwork and get everything settled. And I had a friend who was at the time a close friend of mine who called me up walking into mediation and said, just please give him a little more time. Just give him a little more time to change. This is the Christian thing to do. This is the faith thing to do. This is the kind thing to do. This is the nice thing to do, is to expect change from um, from perpetrators. Uh, the problem is that when you give the perpetrator the benefit of the doubt, then you are automatically re-victimizing the victim. Um, there's this assumption that abusers have no intent. Uh, and they may not have conscious intent. Some do. Some have conscious intent to control. But I would dare say that many are not conscious of their intent to control. And I would say that is in my own situation as well. Um, And it seems so in a lot of the people I've talked to that they are definitely intending to control. They just don't realize that their methods and their reactions and their mannerisms are intent to control. Why do I say that the intent is there? Um, the in that oftentimes the abuse is controlled to a few select people that are controllable: spouses, pets, children, maybe a few subordinates or a few family members. But the same method of reacting is not present when out in public. Often, sometimes it is. Um, the same method of treating people or belittling people is not present with their boss or with their friends. There's when you begin to notice how the perpetrator reacts with different sets of people, is when you begin to see, "Hmm, that's interesting. They can control how they speak there, but they can't control how they speak here, or they can't control how they speak with me, but they can when somebody else walks into the room, or they can when there's the pastor nearby or their boss nearby, someone they need to impress. All of a sudden there's a change in who they are and how they act. That gives a little clue into their ability to control their actions and also their intent. Um, and it's kind of a huge thing to wrap your mind around because you get married or you partner with or you room with or you're parented by what you assume to be a good person in general. And for children, you need your parents to be good parents because that's your whole life. For your spouse, you chose them, you love them, you care for them, and assume that that would be the same coming back towards you. So it's perfectly reasonable to not want to see or feel or even you might be like arguing with me right now. No, 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 no. He just gets angry and he has an anger problem, which might very well be. Uh, And also, there might be an element of the control that the anger is used to scare you, that it isn't used in another way. And you can still love him and care for him, but you are valuable too. And you can have boundaries within that. Uh, just moving a little bit on from that, I mentioned a little earlier a little bit of victim's bad behavior. And this is a huge thing of why the perpetrator is often excused. Um, Oftentimes, you see a victim just sort of explode or create some really bad habits in reaction to the abuse that they've experienced, either as a child and then in their partnered relationship, or perhaps it was created in their partnered relationship. Um, and so people look in and see the victim's bad behavior and they're going, well, no wonder he's doing that. Like he's probably just fed up with it. But what happens there is similar to um, if you were hammering a nail into a piece of wood, you slipped and you hit your thumb. Okay? The hammer hitting your thumb is the abuse. Um, the victim's reaction is probably not going to be their normal self. It's going to be yelling. It's going to be cursing, possibly. It's going to be whatever you do when you hit your thumb with a hammer, um, magnify that by long-term emotional hammering. And imagine if your thumb got hit with a hammer even once a day. You would start to create some weird sort of clinches that normal people would look at you and be like, "You crazy. What are you doing?" But you have to avoid getting your thumb hit every day by a hammer. And so, how can you avoid excusing the perpetrator's behavior when you see victims' bad behavior? Pay attention to what is really going on. Just try to think deeper than what you see right on the surface. Was she like that in college? Did you know her as a child? Uh, Is he like that when he's with his friends? Is he like that in other stressful situations? Or does he tend to have better coping skills outside of a certain situation? Now, once traumatized, the trauma triggers are always there. So you may not be able to say, "Oh, when he's in public, he's fine. When he's at home, he's jumpy." Um, Sometimes that's the case, but again, what you're looking for is a way to not doubt the the victim. Give the benefit of the doubt to the victim instead of the perpetrator. And if you don't know what's going on, you can always say, "Hey, you seem really bothered. I would love to talk to you about it if you feel like sharing." And that just begins to create a safe space where you can share their struggles. And as you share their struggles, just in word and being there, you can begin to create a safe space so that it doesn't have to be so hidden, it doesn't have to be so ignored, and it doesn't have to be so excused. I'd like to throw up the resources if we have that ability. I'm going to sort of talk through them quickly to explain them. Um, so first off, if you don't have the ability to take a picture of these resources, or you don't have paper, or you don't want paper around as evidence of these resources, any of the staff and volunteers here tonight can get you my contact information or give you these resources themselves. Um, you can contact me through my website, and the staff can give you that information. I have a phone number, I have an email address. If you cannot use any of those, there is a phone number you can call. You can use somebody else's phone. Um, and any of the staff or volunteers here tonight would be more than happy to help you with that. Um, so I'm going to go ahead and give you these resources quickly. First off, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is 800-799, and then the word safe, which is 7233. That's 800-799 safe, which is 7233. You can call them. They've got tons of resources, tons of advice. They can walk you through creating a safety plan, which I have not talked about, but which is an amazing idea. People to coordinate with for that, things you can do to help keep yourself safe, children safe, pets safe, paperwork safe, uh, and anything else that you may need if you, in the various decisions you have to make as far as leaving or staying and being safe with your abuser. Northwest Family Life has support groups, which are amazing. I was part of one for a year, and I keep my foot in the door with them. So basically, I have an invite to go back anytime I want, and I do often go back. What is amazing about them? When you walk into, and I didn't walk into it, it's virtual, which is great for you guys because I'm in the Northwest, but you're not. So, you can join one of their virtual groups and they're amazing. Why? Because all of the victims get together and talk. What was my experience? What was my experience? And what happens is you're no longer alone, isolated. You're like, oh, I experienced that too. The name calling? Yeah, me too. It's amazing how damaging that is. Um, Financial abuse? Yeah. I struggled with this and this and this coming out of the this situation. Um, so I strongly support or go to the strongly encourage it. um, Healing the Wounded Heart is a book that Dr. Dan Ellender wrote on um, uh, sexual abuse, healing from sexual abuse. Why do I recommend it here? Oftentimes, uh, emotional abuse has a sexual abuse component to it. Um, I just realized I didn't dive into spiritual abuse. That is emotional abuse with an element of spirituality to it. I wish I had dived deeper into that. If you have questions, I can answer that at the end. Um, he also addresses spiritual abuse in that the emotional control, emotional manipulation with the spiritual aspect. Um, the emotional abuse recovery workbook is not a book that I have personally gone through. I've seen a little bit of it and I'm very impressed with a little bit of it. Um, the gal that I greatly respect, Tabitha is her name, at Northwest Family Life. She leads one of the support groups. Um, she recommends this book and is going through it with a group right now. And it has some incredibly powerful information and helpful normalization for our victims. I encourage also community members to think about going through it and gaining a better understanding of what it's like to be a victim and the issues that victims face. And that will open you up even more to seeing the ignored and seeing the excused. The last book that I'd like to recommend is Healing the Trauma of Abuse. Um, these are all available on the website. So if you just go to uh, Living Spirit website, which the staff and volunteers can give you that website. These will all be listed with their full links. Um, so at this time, I'd love to open it up. I threw a ton of stuff at you, and I'm realizing the things that I forgot to tell you that probably would have been helpful to tell you. So let me pause and see if any of you have questions or I said something and it just really bothers you and you would love to have some more dialogue on that. I would love to engage that with you. Yeah. Um, why doesn't the victim leave? Um, it seems like that would be the easiest thing to do. So I think most the most poignant way I can explain is through my own story, and my story does resemble other stories that I've heard. Um, I was raised in the mindset that you marry quickly, you marry once, and then you commit to who you married forever. And that means giving everything to make it work. If you leave, you aren't doing everything to make it work. If you leave, you are damaging your children beyond repair. If you leave, you are letting your church down. If you leave, you are not obeying God. If you leave, you are disrupting the family. And so I had all of this internalized belief in my story. So when I came to a position where I finally realized that what I was experiencing was not appropriate for a human to be experiencing, then I had to wrestle with, okay, I now realize several years later that I am worth more than this. But that requires going against what I believe God wants me to do, going against what I believe is healthy for my children, going against what I believe is right for my family, going against what I believe is right for my community, and going against what my church says is right to do. That takes an incredible amount of strength for a victim to say, I am worth more than this, and I'm going to sacrifice all these things to live into that. It feels selfish, it feels horrible, it feels wrong, and you have to fight yourself amidst all the other community and input from church, family, children, etc. to leave. Thank you all. That was really a pleasure to be able to live through this part of the story with you.